Hello, fellow genetic detectives, and welcome back to Decoding Dynasty. Today, we're not just opening a dusty old history book, we're essentially looking at the most tangled family tree in European history, and let me tell you, it makes your holiday dinner awkward look like a picnic. We're talking about Charles II of Spain, the very last of the Spanish Habsburgs, who gained the rather dramatic nickname, the Bewitched. Now, why the Bewitched, you ask? Well, imagine being born into one of the most powerful dynasties in Europe, destined to rule a vast empire, but from day one, you're, let's just say, not quite right. Whispers followed him everywhere, about his health, his rather unique looks, Habsburg jaw, oh, we're getting into it, and most importantly, his terrifying inability to produce an heir. The whole kingdom thought he was under a literal spell. But here on Decoding Dynasty, we're armed with 21st century science, not fairy dust. Forget witches and warlocks. The real magic trick was how many times cousins married cousins in that Habsburg family. His family tree didn't just branch, it actually braided itself into a genetically problematic pretzel, which, spoiler alert, did not end well. We're going beyond the palace rumors and historical gossip to use the power of genetics to understand why Charles was so incredibly unwell. We're going to unravel a tangled web of ailments, from his struggles with walking and talking to the intense questions surrounding his very sex and ability to father children, all the way to the organ failures that ultimately claimed his life. And trust me, when you see just how much inbreeding went on, bewitched starts to sound like the least wild explanation. So grab your comfiest chair and your biggest magnifying glass, because we're about to journey back to the Spanish court to decode the real story of the bewitched king and discover the fascinating, sometimes darkly humorous genetic truths behind his legendary infirmity. So, after that rather uncomfortable family reunion discussion, let's actually meet the man himself, King Charles II of Spain. He was born in 1661, and right from the get-go, things were complicated. His dad, Philip IV, was pretty old for the time, 56, and Charles's older brother had just passed away, so the whole court was desperate for a healthy heir. When little Charles arrived, there was initial joy, with reports calling him a robust male, which, spoiler alert, was probably a bit of hopeful spin doctoring, because almost immediately, whispers flew around Europe, including from his own Austrian relatives, saying, we don't think Spain actually has a prince because he's not male but female. Talk about a rough start to life. Now let's talk about his looks. When you see portraits of Charles II painted by masters like Claudio Coelho and Carreño de Miranda, you immediately notice that infamous Habsburg jaw, that severe prognathism where the lower jaw juts out. It wasn't just a facial quirk, it was so pronounced that he had trouble chewing, leading to poor eating habits and even a legendary addiction to chocolate. Beyond that, we see descriptions of a long face, prominent chin and ears, widely spaced eyes, and sometimes even a prematurely aged appearance. Think of it as a walking, talking royal billboard for generations of intense inbreeding. But his challenges went way beyond just his appearance. His childhood was a marathon of medical issues and developmental delays. His skull bones hadn't even closed properly at 3 years old, and he couldn't stand until then, or walk until he was 6. Even at 9, he struggled to get around. Imagine being king at 4, still exclusively breastfed and apparently biting his wet nurses, and then being told to stop because it was indecorous. Poor guy. He was plagued by constant illnesses. Measles, chickenpox, rubella, smallpox, basically every childhood disease you can think of. He had endless bronchial and dental infections and bouts of incurable diarrhea. And yes, he suffered from epileptic seizures, a condition we actually explored in detail when we talked about Emperor Ferdinand I, if you remember, which grew increasingly severe towards the end of his life. Intellectually, despite having the best tutors money could buy, he struggled immensely. At 9, he could barely speak, and reading or writing? Forget about it. He lacked willpower and was easily swayed, though he did have frequent outbursts of anger. Essentially, he was physically and intellectually frail, leading to a reign marked by political instability and a struggling Castile. Then there was the elephant in the royal chambers, infertility. He was married twice, desperate for an heir, but it never happened. His first queen, Maria Luisa, even confided that he suffered from premature ejaculation, which, when you dig into the research, probably wasn't just about speed, but more about where the ejaculate was going, hinting at serious anatomical issues like hypospadias. And his later years were marked by severe physical decline, generalized edemas, swelling, extreme weakness, more fevers, and that persistent diarrhea. This constant state of infirmity, coupled with his inability to produce an heir, led the people and even Charles himself to believe he was bewitched. They actually tried exorcisms and weird potions, like oil with exorcism blessings or eating powdered vipers. Yum. It truly shows how desperately they searched for an explanation for what, to them, seemed like a curse. So, when he finally died in 1700, just shy of 39, the autopsy revealed some incredibly stark findings that perfectly explain his lifelong struggles and set the stage for our genetic decoding. A very small heart, corroded lungs, gangrenous intestines, 3 large kidney stones, a single testicle as black as coal, and, wait for it, his head full of water. Oof. A condition called hydrocephalus, which we got into with Emperor Ferdinand I. That's the kind of complex, challenging life we're talking about. But now that we've set the scene, let's get down to the truly fascinating part. What genetic secrets were hiding behind all those symptoms? We're going to put on our genetic detective hats and investigate the leading theories that explain his lifelong struggle with developmental delays and intellectual disability, his probable intersexual state and infertility, why he had those mysterious skeletal deformities and the recurring infections, and ultimately, his crucial kidney problems that led to his death. Get ready, because the puzzle pieces are about to click into place. All right, genetic detectives. Remember those very awkward whispers right after Charles II was born? The ones hinting he might not be male but female? Well, it turns out those whispers might have been onto something far more complicated than anyone in the 17th century could possibly have imagined. We're about to dive into the fascinating and often misunderstood world of disorders of sex development, or DSDs, specifically focusing on what's called true hermaphroditism, or as it's now more scientifically known, ovotesticular DSD, and also XX male syndrome. So what are we talking about here? In a nutshell, a person with true hermaphroditism has both ovarian tissue, which usually makes eggs, and testicular tissue, which usually makes sperm, in their body. I know, wild, right? And XX male syndrome is another twist. It's where someone has the typical female chromosomes, 46X, but develops male characteristics. These conditions are rare, and they tell us just how complex our sex determination really is, far beyond just X and Y chromosomes. How does this even happen on a molecular level? Well, normally, a tiny gene called SRY on the Y chromosome is the big boss, telling the body to develop testes.
Yes, sir.
But in some cases of XX male syndrome, the SRY gene, being a bit of a rebel, actually translocates or jumps from the Y chromosome onto one of the X chromosomes during the dad's sperm formation. So, even though the baby gets 2 X chromosomes, it also inherits this rogue SRY gene, which kicks off male development. Now, it gets even more fascinating. In some cases of true hermaphroditism, or XX males, the SRY gene isn't even there. This points to other sneaky genes on the X chromosome or other chromosomes, we call them autosomes, that can step in and mess with the sex-determining pathway. We're talking about genes like RSPO1 or PROCAR2, which when mutated, can lead to these complex DSDs. It's like a whole orchestra of genes trying to play the tune of boy or girl, and sometimes a few notes get played in the wrong order, creating a unique, blended melody. For Charles II, this genetic soup could explain so much. Remember his single testicle as black as coal from the autopsy? That's our direct evidence of testicular abnormality, perhaps unilateral testicular agenesis or an atrophic cryptorchid testicle. And his queen's rather awkward confession about his premature ejaculation, where the poor ejaculate didn't enter her vaginal cavity, that strongly points to hypospadias, a condition where the urethra opens on the underside of the penis, which often accompanies ambiguous genitalia in DSDs. Combine that with his lifelong infertility and the rampant whispers about his sex at birth, and the picture becomes clearer. Charles II most probably lived with an intersexual state, likely true hermaphroditism or XX male syndrome. It perfectly explains why he couldn't fulfill his most crucial royal duty, producing an heir, and gives a powerful scientific explanation for what people thought was bewitchment. So, while the court was busy with exorcisms, the real story was unfolding deep within Charles's chromosomes and genes, a complex testament to the power of genetics. But this is just one piece of his astonishing medical puzzle. All right, detectives, we've talked about Charles's very confusing plumbing, but let's shift our gaze to another major challenge he faced: his significant developmental delays and intellectual disability. Remember how he couldn't walk until he was 6, or speak properly at 9, and struggled immensely with learning? For centuries, people just thought he was slow, or again, bewitched. But modern genetics offers a much more precise suspect: Fragile X syndrome. So, what exactly is Fragile X? Well, it's the most common inherited cause of intellectual disability, and it's a bit of a tricky one. It happens because of a peculiar genetic glitch on the X chromosome, specifically in a gene called FMR1. Inside this gene, there's a small section where a DNA sequence, CGG, gets repeated over and over and over again too. If you get more than 200 of these repeats, it's like a genetic alarm going off. This massive expansion causes the FMR1 gene to effectively silence itself. It gets shut down through a process called hypermethylation. When the FMR1 gene goes silent, it can't produce a crucial protein called FMRP, Fragile X mental retardation protein. Think of FMRP as a really important messenger in your brain, helping to build and maintain healthy connections between neurons, especially at the synapses, those tiny gaps where brain cells communicate. Without FMRP, these connections get all wonky, leading to issues with learning, memory, and behavior. It's a bit like trying to build a superhighway for thoughts, but you're missing all the key construction workers. Now, how does this fit our king? Perfectly. Many of Charles II's documented symptoms align with FXS. His significant intellectual disability, his struggles with speech, dysarthria, and those marked developmental delays from early childhood are classic hallmarks. And remember those portraits we looked at? The research tells us that FXS often comes with a distinctive facial appearance: a long face, prominent chin and ears, and macrocephaly, a larger head in early development. These features, along with his documented joint slackness, muscular hypotonia, and difficulties walking, map strikingly well onto the typical FXS physical phenotype. Even his head full of water, hydrocephalus, which we mentioned from the autopsy, could connect here. Some individuals with FXS show enlargement of the brain's lateral ventricles, which are the fluid-filled spaces, a potential link to that finding. And while FXS often comes with enlarged testes, macroorchidism, Charles had an atrophic one, but that's where the plot thickens with his other probable conditions like XX male syndrome, creating a really complex interplay. So, while he wasn't bewitched by a sorcerer, Charles II's mind and body might have been profoundly shaped by this subtle yet powerful genetic fragility on his X chromosome, offering a truly scientific explanation for his lifelong struggles. And believe it or not, there's even more to this royal puzzle. So far, we've talked about the ambiguity of Charles II's sex development and his intellectual struggles. But now let's zero in on one of his most defining and tragic characteristics: his profound infertility. Remember that chilling autopsy finding of his single testicle as black as coal? That wasn't just a grim detail. It points directly to a major genetic suspect: Klinefelter's syndrome, or KS. Klinefelter's syndrome is actually the most common sex chromosome disorder in males. Instead of the typical 46XY chromosome set, individuals with classic KS have at least one extra X chromosome, most commonly a 47XXY karyotype. It's like accidentally getting an extra instruction manual for one part of your development. Now, how does this extra X cause issues? While most of the genes on that extra X chromosome actually get silenced, a clever biological trick called X inactivation, a crucial few escape this silencing. These rogue genes, now present in an extra copy, can mess with the delicate balance of development, particularly male sexual development. For Charles II, if he had KS, It would likely have been a mosaic form, meaning some of his cells would be the typical 46XY and others would be 47XXY. Why do we lean towards mosaicism for Charles? Well, classic KS often comes with features like unusual tallness and gynecomastia, enlarged breast tissue, neither of which Charles II was known for. So his historical presentation points away from the classic 47XXY, but the mosaic version can explain his symptoms without those other common traits. And what symptoms are we talking about? The fit is almost uncanny. The most striking commonality is the small atrophic testes and the resulting infertility. This is practically the hallmark of KS. The extra X chromosome severely disrupts the development and function of the testes, leading to impaired sperm production and low testosterone, a condition known as hypergonadotropic hypogonadism. This perfectly aligns with Charles's documented sterility and that autopsy finding. Beyond the reproductive issues, KS can also contribute to the kind of cognitive and language deficits we saw in Charles. Individuals with KS often experience verbal and language difficulties, learning disabilities, and sometimes even social challenges. So his struggles with speech, writing, and overall intellectual development could very well have been compounded by this chromosomal anomaly. So while he didn't fit every textbook description of Klinefelter's syndrome, the mosaic form of KS offers a compelling explanation for the core of Charles II's male reproductive failure and contributes significantly to his overall developmental struggles. It's another powerful piece of evidence suggesting that the bewitchment was actually a complex genetic inheritance playing out in real time. All right, genetic detectives, we've pieced together some fascinating parts of Charles II's genetic puzzle, from his ambiguous sex to his mental struggles. But what if there was one underlying genetic condition that could explain almost everything? One diagnosis that acts as a kind of master key to unlock this royal medical mystery? Well, some modern researchers are strongly suggesting a very strong candidate: aspartyl glucosaminuria, or AGU. Now, AGU sounds like a mouthful, but let's break it down. It's a lysosomal storage disorder, and it's inherited in an autosomal recessive manner. What does that mean? It means you need two faulty copies of a specific gene, one from each parent, to get the disease. And if you've been listening to this podcast, you already know what that screams: inbreeding. This is why AGU, though rare worldwide, is much more prevalent in populations with a high degree of consanguinity, making the Habsburgs a prime suspect pool. So, how does AGU work its molecular mischief? It's all about a tiny enzyme called aspartyl glucosaminidase, or AGA, which is produced by the AGA gene on chromosome 4. This enzyme is like a cellular recycling worker, responsible for breaking down certain complex sugar protein molecules called glycoasparagenes inside your cell's recycling centers, the lysosomes. But in AGU, due to a mutation in the AGA gene, this enzyme is either deficient or completely missing. What happens then? It's like your recycling bin overflows. These glycoasparagens can't be broken down, so they accumulate and build up, especially in the brain and connective tissues. This toxic buildup essentially clogs up the cellular machinery, leading to progressive dysfunction in virtually all cell types over time, particularly neurons. And this is where Charles II slots in so perfectly. Remember his distinctive facial features, those we noted in his portraits? The research on AGU describes a very specific facial phenotype: coarse facial features, widely spaced eyes, puffy eyelids, small ears, full lips, a square and prominent jaw, and a short, broad nose. Sound familiar? Many of these align directly with the famous Habsburg jaw and his overall appearance. Plus, AGU patients are often described as appearing prematurely aged, which certainly fits Charles II's rapid decline and appearance. Beyond his looks, AGU explains so many of his other chronic issues. His early developmental delays, delayed speech and motor skills, his progressive intellectual disability, his skeletal abnormalities, and even his recurrent infections are all classic symptoms of AGU. Remember his clumsiness and walking difficulties? AGU can cause gait disturbances and muscular hypotonia. Even his epileptic seizures are a recognized feature of the syndrome. And that early macrocephaly that often progresses with AGU could even tie into his head full of water autopsy finding. The beauty of the AGU hypothesis is that it provides a single, overarching genetic explanation for the full breadth of Charles II's ailments, from his physical appearance and intellectual struggles to his recurrent infections and ultimately his overall fragile health. It truly makes you wonder if the Bewitched was simply a tragic case of faulty cellular recycling. All right, genetic detectives, we've explored some pretty intense internal genetic conditions so far. But what about the most famous, most visible sign of the Habsburgs' tangled family tree? We're talking, of course, about that legendary, unmistakable Habsburg jaw. In Charles II, it was particularly pronounced, literally jutting out in every portrait, making him look rather formidable, shall we say. Scientifically, this famous jawline is known as mandibular prognathism. It's a condition where the lower jaw protrudes significantly forward beyond the upper jaw, giving a prominent chin and often a concave facial profile. It wasn't unique to the Habsburgs, of course, but boy, did they perfect it. So how did this rather dramatic facial feature get so pronounced in the family, and especially in Charles? Unlike some of the other complex syndromes we've discussed, the Habsburg jaw is often considered a multifactorial and polygenic trait. What does that mean? It means it's not usually caused by a single rogue gene, but by the combined effect of many genes working together, or, in this case, perhaps a bit too enthusiastically. Genes like ADAMTSL1, MYO1H, N1, and COL2A1 have all been implicated. For example, mutations in ADAMSL1 can lead to a failure in properly regulating cartilage growth, causing the lower jaw to just keep growing a bit more than it should. And here's where the inbreeding comes back to haunt us. While some families might have a genetic predisposition to this jaw, the Habsburgs kept doubling down on it. By consistently marrying close relatives, they relentlessly concentrated these specific gene variants, generation after generation. It's like selectively breeding for a very specific trait, except in this case it was a prominent chin and a severely misaligned bite, what dentists call a Class III malocclusion. For Charles II, this wasn't just a quirky family resemblance. His jaw was so severe, it famously made chewing incredibly difficult, leading to poor eating habits and likely contributing to his overall frailty. It probably even impacted his speech, dysarthria, making his already labored communication even more challenging. So that famous Habsburg jaw wasn't just a visual signature of his lineage. It was a daily struggle, a constant physical reminder of his family's genetic legacy. It's a stark visual testament to the cumulative effect of inbreeding, showing how specific traits can become amplified to debilitating levels. But while it's the most famous external sign, there were far more hidden and devastating genetic battles happening inside his royal body. All right, genetic detectives, we've explored the genetic roots of Charles II's ambiguous sex, intellectual disabilities, and even his iconic jaw. But now, let's address the very organs that ultimately failed him: his kidneys. Remember that stark autopsy finding? 3 large kidney stones? And the fact that he suffered from incurable diarrhea and generalized edema, swelling, in his final years? These are all strong hints that his kidneys were in serious trouble. While we can't definitively say Charles II was born with only 1 kidney, congenital monorenal status, the autopsy only mentions a single testicle and the kidney stones. It's possible that the other kidney was either absent from birth or severely underdeveloped, a condition that falls under the umbrella of congenital anomalies of the kidney and urinary tract, KCUT. KCUT is a broad term for structural abnormalities that can arise during fetal development. What's the genetic connection? Well, KCUT is incredibly complex, with over 200 genes potentially involved. Some of the key players include genes like COL4A3, COL4A4, COL4A5, HNF1B, PKD1, and PKD2. Mutations in these genes can disrupt the delicate dance between the developing ureteric bud and the metanephric mesenchyme, the tissues that form the kidney. This disruption can lead to a whole spectrum of problems, from mild reflux to complete kidney agenesis, absence. Even if Charles II did have 2 kidneys at birth, KCUT can still be a factor. Many of these anomalies predispose individuals to chronic kidney failure, CKD, later in life. Why? because the abnormal kidney structure often leads to reduced nephron number, the kidney's filtering units, and compensatory hyperfiltration. The remaining kidney works overtime to compensate. This extra workload can cause progressive damage over time. But what about those kidney stones? Well, kidney stones themselves aren't directly caused by Kakut, but they are a common complication of CKD. The impaired kidney function can lead to an imbalance of minerals and other substances in the urine, making it easier for stones to form. And those stones, in turn, would have further damaged his already compromised kidneys. The incurable diarrhea and edema, swelling, in Charles II's final years are also classic signs of advanced kidney failure. The kidneys are crucial for regulating fluid balance in the body, so when they fail, fluid can build up, causing swelling. And the diarrhea? Well, that can be a complex symptom of uremia, the buildup of toxins in the blood when the kidneys can't filter properly. So, while we can't definitively say which specific genetic mutation or C8 anomaly Charles II might have had, the evidence strongly suggests that his kidneys were a major weak point in his already fragile health. It's a tragic culmination of his genetic inheritance, ultimately contributing to his early death. And there you have it, Genetic Detectives. We've journeyed through the tragic, complex, and utterly fascinating life of Charles II, the Bewitched. What his contemporaries saw as a dark curse, we've decoded through the lens of modern genetics, revealing a cascade of inherited conditions from his likely intersexual state and Fragile X syndrome, to the broad impact of aspartyl-glucosaminuria, the subtle effects of Klinefelter syndrome, that iconic Habsburg jaw, and ultimately, his failing kidneys. His story is a powerful, albeit heartbreaking, testament to the profound consequences of extreme inbreeding, and a vivid reminder that sometimes the biggest mysteries in history are just waiting for science to catch up. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through the tangled family tree of the Habsburgs. It's been quite the ride. Until next time, keep those genetic curiosity cells firing and stay tuned for more Decoding Dynasty.